Thank you for joining today's webinar on economic loss, the hidden costs of prevailing pension reforms. Today's program is part of NCPERS Center for Online Learning. The purpose of the Center for Online Learning is to provide remote continuing education to public pension trustees, staff, and other fiduciaries and stakeholders. For many Americans, the cornerstone of retirement security is their public pensions. Unfortunately, since the late 1990s, and certainly intensifying since the Great Recession, there are shrill voices calling for the end of pensions for state and local employees. They allege unsustainable costs, unmanageable risks, and paint teachers, public safety officers, and other public servants as unworthy of this benefit. But the real question is closing public pensions a good public policy? In today's webinar, we will attempt to answer that question using the metric of what is the economic impact of closing public pensions. Leading us in today's webinar is Dr. Michael Kahn, NCPERS Director of Research. He is also the author of the economic law study. As always, we encourage your questions and comments. However, in order to get through the presentation, we will hold all questions and comments till the end. The prepared portion of this session will last approximately 30 minutes. Additionally, today's presentation and all other supporting materials are available in the handout section of the dashboard. With that, Michael, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Hank, and it's an honor and pleasure to speak with you today. Since I serve as Director of Research at NCPERS, let me say a few words about research and scientific inquiry. It may seem to be an arcane activity to those who are not familiar with research, but borrowing words from astrophysicist, I don't know, some of you may even watch his show on television, Neil deGrasse Tyson. On the Science Day, actually, I watched his message, and it sort of brought home what I do for a living. So really, it's through research and scientific inquiry that America became from really a backward country to the greatest nation in the world. Unfortunately, today we have people who don't know much about research and scientific inquiry rising to power and standing in denial on issues facing our country, such as pensions and economy. This is really a recipe for disaster. It's like saying Dr. Salk research that resulted in polio vaccine was just a hoax, and it's not true. Research is actually, to me at least, is an exercise in finding the truth. It consists of a hypothesis, then finding the data, doing the analysis, testing the hypothesis, checking, rechecking, and reviewing what others have said about this. And then out of all this exercise, which may be arcane, but emerges a new emergent truth. When you have established this kind of emerging truth through research, it's true whether you believe it or not. The new and emergent truth is, at least to me, is that when we dismantle pensions, economy suffers. You know better than I do, public pensions are under constant attack by those who would like to dismantle them and replace them with do-it-yourself 401k style defined contribution plans. And based on misleading information, states have been taking actions that are chipping away at public pensions and slowly dismantling them without realizing the economic damage their actions will inflict on their local, state economies as well as our national economy. So today I would touch on in the next 15-20 minutes on the following points. Pension funds provide great stimulus to the economy, but when we undermine pensions, the economy suffers. So we'll talk about each of these points. We must understand how pensions are funded, what their current funding status, and over time, I mean, research value added is looking at, let's say, last 30 years, looking at the time horizon and then see what are the trends, and then you get a better understanding of how it's working. Number fourth bullet, we need to recognize the economic consequences of dismantling pensions. We must explore ways to address pension funding issues without dismantling them. At least that's the conclusion of our research. So the first point was pension funds really are great stimulants of our economy. Spending by retirees stimulates local economies, and pension assets are an important source of capital for business. A recent study by Public Finance Management Group, the PFM group, suggests that spending by retirees accounts for about 5.3% of our gross national product. A recent study by NCPERS, National Institute on Retirement Security, shows that defined benefit pension plans provide a stimulation effect of about $1.2 trillion to our economy. Pension funds are also great stabilizers of our economy, and that's what our research shows. When, for example, when the market goes down, investors run for the door, but pension funds are long-term investors, and they provide some stability to financial as well as other economic indicators in our economy. So the next point was, but when we undermine pension, the economy suffers. Unfortunately, we have been, as I mentioned, steadily dismantling pensions, cutting benefits. By dismantling, I mean cutting benefit, increasing employee contributions. You pay more and get less, and converting DB plans into DC plans or some kind of combination plan, which usually ends up less than what you had before. Our analysis of data from, as I said, over time we look at this 1980s, 90s, 2000s, that shows that when pension funds are dismantled in this fashion, economic inequities rise, which in turn drag the economy down. So that's really the theory behind our research. Dismantling pension also increases economic instability. Robert Shiller, Nobel Prize winner in economics, argues that shift from DB to DC plans is one of the reasons that gave rise to asset bubbles. And when bubbles pop, everyone suffers. We are still trying to get out of the 2008 drop, bursting of that bubble. And the bubble is formed when asset prices rise more quickly than the economic base for that kind of assets, like housing or stocks, whatever. And the reason DB to DC conversion in the last 30 years or so gave rise to asset bubble is because now the investment decisions that were made for individuals by pension boards with the help of experts are now being made by individuals themselves who don't really know a whole lot about investment. So that transition actually gave rise to a bubble that Dr. Shiller is speaking about. So, so we talked about the positive impact of pensions on the economy, and we talked about negative impact of dismantling pensions on the economy. We expect that negative impact of pension cuts on the economy will be greater than the positive impact of pensions that we are looking at now. And this is because people, when you get a pension check, you may not spend all of it. But if the pension is cut, then the cut is dollar for dollar. So the impact on the economy is greater of cuts than the positive impact that we experience or calculate of spending of pension checks, because people may not spend all of their money. If they got $100 in pension, they may spend 90, or they may spend it somewhere in Spain in their travels. So that's the reason. Opponents of public pensions seem to have little or no understanding. So they really, a lot of it is based on ideology. They pick and choose information. So we look at, again, over time period, you can see a public pension plan. This is based on census data from 1940s all the way to 2014. Look at the composition of the income of public pension funds in the United States. And you will see that the sort of red line is employer contribution, blue line is employee contributions, and green line is investment earnings. So that's the three pieces of income that a pension fund receives. So over time, originally, most of the money for pension plans came from employees, actually. And over time, we can see that investment earnings played a great role. It's almost like 3 out of $4 coming from investment earnings over time. So there have been ups and downs. Even after recovery from 2008, the earnings are slowly recovering to get back into. So this is a great deal for taxpayers. By paying only 25 cents on a dollar, they get the dollar worth of service from public employees for their pensions. So, of course, opponents of public pensions apply, and this is another misinformation or lack of understanding on the part of those who attack public pensions. So opponents of public pension apply private sector rate of return rules to public sector pensions and come up with huge numbers. Then they compare a 30-year unfunded liability numbers with 1-year revenues to make their case for dismantling public pensions. So this sort of shows either it's ideology or just trying to, at any cost, dismantle public pensions. But that's not how public pensions work. Whereas private companies may and do go out of business, states are here to stay. The reason for private companies' DB plans to have a low rate of return was that they go out of business, so they want to make sure the employees are not stuck. Whereas state and local governments are there to stay. I mean, and the fact is that public pensions are in a better shape than portrayed by our opponents. And you could see this was done a while last year using the data that we had available, but you could see this pie chart. The blue is funded, and the red is unfunded. So unfunded looks like a very small portion. If you had a mortgage like this on your house, and blue part is paid off and the red is not, I don't think you would be just worried a lot about your situation. And difference, of course, between pension and mortgages, that the amortization period is, let's say if it's 30 years, after 30 years, you still keep going because government, states are here to stay, and it just restarts all over again. It's not the end of that period. Funding level, you hear a lot about it, and you could see pension funds are very resilient, I should say, looking at the data over time. We had 2001 recession. Their funding levels dropped by about 10 to 15%. And before the 2007 recession, they were back where they were. And now they are again in an upward trajectory, and hopefully will stay on this. But there are, ups and downs in the market. But they have a long time horizon, and they are very resilient. If left alone, if the attacks stop, then I think we would be in a much better shape. A lot of time you hear, taxpayers can't afford these pension plans. And I always ask, what is it that taxpayers can afford? Actually, taxpayers want services. And we have sort of ruined our state and local revenue structures over last 30 years. So it's hard to even provide adequate funding for schools, for roads, for bridges, for public safety. So it's not just the question of looking at just the pension we can't afford it. Here the question is, if we let our tax revenue structure keep them on the same path that we have been, then we probably can't afford anything else either. So that's what we need to do, as we'll talk about it at the end. Moving right along, opponents of public pensions have really no clue how much damage it will inflict on the economy in 2025 if dismantling of public pensions continue. And so we spent time looking at data and trying to make projections and all that. We came up with this number of $3.3 trillion of damage if we stay on the path that we are on in terms of chipping away at public pension, dismantling them. Not only at national level, we also look at individual state levels, and state of Alabama, which is the first line here, and we also look at the rate of economic growth. So if dismantling continues, the economy of state of Alabama in 2025 would be about 218 billion. And I'm sorry, 218 billion, out of which the loss or the damage due to dismantling of public pension, state and local pension plans in state of Alabama, the damage would be about 19 billion. So that's a significant number for a small state like Alabama. And you can look at your own state. There is a publication that has all 50 states listed that Hank mentioned, our latest publication. So what should we do? I think we need to explore ways to address pension funding issues without dismantling them. And based on just exploring or what different state and local pension plans have been doing, we came up with a list of things, and it's expanding as we continue our research in this area. The first approach is asset monetization and creating dedicated revenue sources. There's a possibility of using well-designed pension obligation bonds. Pension obligation bonds have a mixed history in the past, but I think we have reviewed some of that experience of the past and propose a better way to move forward. So this is something to consider as we go along. Instead of dismantling, use some of these approaches. Of course, these are, they have pluses and minuses, and they should be carefully examined. But these are some of the options to consider. As I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest problems facing state and local governments is that they have over time made their revenues less aligned with the economy. Of course, the economy is growing on the internet, and we are still stuck with the tax system that was designed for 50 years ago or so. So it hasn't been modernized, and it not keeping up with the needs of citizens, residents of the states and localities. So that's one thing that should be considered. Something where most people agree is, closing tax loopholes, which are often given in the name of economic development and has a very poor record of showing any results. Management of risks in economic ups and downs, that's another area where a lot of research is undergoing and efforts. Other options now the states are trying last 2-3 years are creating a stabilization fund, for example. For bad time, could we depend on a stabilization fund created in good times? Things like that. And economies of scale. Some states are trying to consolidate small plans into larger plans, like in Wisconsin. And each of these approaches have pluses and minuses, unfortunately. So it should be carefully assessed or evaluated before implementing them. And there are others that we continue to explore. So with that, I want to thank you and turn it back to Hank.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
So we are open for questions. As people are getting their questions ready, I have one comment, Michael. So, sure. 3 years ago, you published the income inequality, the hidden economic costs of prevailing approaches to pension reform, and basically the upshot of that report was that income inequality was increasing in the United States, and part of that was due to the conversion of defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans. Last year, you published the economic volatility, and the showing of that report was that when you dismantle pensions, building on the work of the previous year, not only do you increase income inequality, but you also exacerbate the economic volatility, so that the boom times go higher and the busts go lower. And then this year, you talk about the economic loss. So, what is sort of the general theme that you can thread through all three reports? That what's the story that people on this webinar should take away from these three reports?
Yeah, as I was saying, there's through research comes out an emergent truth, and what we are finding is that if we dismantle pensions if we move from DB to DC plans, as well as other cuts in pension benefits, like what's happening at state and local level, has a damaging impact on our economy. And when we talk about economy in general, most people would talk about jobs and income and inflation and things like that. But they overlook the role that rising income inequality plays. I mean, whether you are conservative or, progressive, and whatever your views are on income inequality, doesn't really matter. What ends up being the result is that as the income gaps increases, the economy slows down and everybody suffers. So whether you have a pension or not, you still suffer because of this trend that's going on. So the theme really is that, don't dismantle them. There's a better way, and pay attention to what you're doing to your revenue system as well. Otherwise, it's just heading in the wrong direction. If we stay on this path, we really cause a significant damage to our economy and our economic future, and which includes individuals, incomes, jobs, everything that the economy stands for.
And Michael, does the inverse stand true, which is if somehow we're fortunate enough as a nation to start reversing this trend and we can bring more retirement security to retired Americans and bring back pensions, would it diminish or reduce the income gap? Would it stabilize the economy? And could we add $3.3 trillion to the economy?
Yes, I mean the positive impact is there, as I spoke about in the beginning, and in research, you have to sort of isolate, because pensions are not the only thing that has impact on there are other factors also. So when we did the earlier research and even this research, we tried to isolate the impact of pensions, and you can measure that impact on income inequality, on economic slowdown, on the economic instability or stability. So there is the research showed that there is clear impact that pensions have. So increasing pension for those who don't have it has a positive impact. And as I mentioned, on the measurement of economic output, our GDP, our personal income growth, the negative impact is more. It won't be $3.3 trillion. That's the negative impact, but positive impact maybe is going to be a little bit less, because not all the money is spent. The economy grows through spending by consumers. As the money is spent, people, the sales increase and people buy things, go to restaurants. So, it will have definitely a positive impact. You probably reverse it back to, I was saying the damage could be 3.3 trillion, but if you go the other way around, if everybody had secure choice then the positive impact may not be 3.3, but a little bit like close to $3 trillion or so, because of that explanation I gave before. Because cutting is dollar for dollar, and spending impact, the positive impact might be 90 cents on a dollar. They may save 10 cents, or they may spend out of the country's locality. So that's a simple explanation. But the answer is yes.
Great, thank you. And then we do have one question, and the question is regarding the $3.3 trillion in 2025. Is that aggregating from now to 2025, or is it in the year 2025 that the loss would be 3.3 trillion? And presumably, if it's the latter, that every year it will be around 3.3 trillion.
No, it's not every year. It's just accumulated by that time. So
got it.
It just builds up. And by 2025, if our economy was going to be like $22 trillion, it's going to be $19 trillion, as it's shown in one of the charts. So it will drag it down every year. It's sort of building up. So 3.3 trillion is the aggregate from now. If we continue on the path, then we are going to cause that damage. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Michael.
Sure.
So yes, thank you, Michael. So this concludes our webinar. At the conclusion, there will be 3 short survey questions that we ask you to answer. Thank you again, and we look forward to your attendance at the next NCPERS webinar, which will actually be a webcast in July, doing a review of state legislative activities, state and federal legislative activities for 2017. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.